Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. I'm a high-end raider making videos with the goal of providing informative and helpful content to assist you guys in getting better, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Arms Warrior rotation. Specifically, I'll be going in depth on how to perform the rotation in single target, AoE, Cleave, all that stuff. If you're interested in the talents, legendaries, gearing, conduits, covenants, anything and everything that you want to know about Arms Warrior, I have a separate video talking about that. In this video, we're only going to be going over the rotation, so if you're interested in any of that stuff, I would recommend watching that video as a precursor to this one. However, if you're only interested in the rotation, this is the video for you. Before I get into the video, if you find it helpful and you like the video, please make sure to drop a like, as that helps me out a ton. Pretty new to WoW content creation, so every little bit helps. And if you're interested in supporting me further, I offer a coaching service where I one-on-one help people, usually in a Discord call. I just help people set up their UI, perfect their rotation, set up add-ons, macros, literally anything and everything that you could need help with, I'm able to help you with. So if you're interested in that, please make sure to add me on Discord. But with all that stuff out of the way, let's get right into the video. One caveat to this is that I'm only going to be going over the rotation as it pertains to a Venthyr warrior. Reason being is 99% of warriors are Venthyr, and typically speaking, Venthyr is just more well-rounded. However, if you are playing Carrion or Night Fae, you can still perform okay. I've been seeing some logs recently of Carrion warriors doing pretty well. However, I'm not going to be talking about how those abilities interact with your rotation. If you are one of those covenants, I'm sorry, I just don't want to end up having this video be like 30 minutes long, and then that would also require me to learn how to use those abilities perfectly. And you know, that also includes like different conduits and stuff like that. And honestly, I'm just inexperienced with the other covenants, so I wouldn't feel comfortable giving you guys very in-depth guides on that because I am not those covenants and I haven't played them. Again, 99% of warriors are Venthyr, so generally this video is going to reach the most people. But if you are those other covenants, you can still take away a lot from this video. Most of the stuff will be pretty similar, however not completely similar, or identical rather. Another caveat is that I'm going to be talking about the rotation when you're using Signet. I'm going to be assuming that you have Signet rather. The reason being is that you use this legendary in literally all forms of content, and especially in PvE, this is by far and away your best legendary and pretty much mandatory. If you've made Unhinged or you're like a PvP guy, maybe you're using Cephus or something and you're trying to get into PvE content, you can still take away a lot from the video, and you pretty much perform the rotation the exact same. However, not having Signet is a massive DPS loss, so I would highly recommend getting Signet as soon as possible if you're trying to get into PvE content. Even if it's just at 190, I would highly recommend going and making that legendary and then coming back to the video so that you have a better understanding of how it works. One more thing before we get into it, I'm going to be talking about the rotation when using these talents. Again, I don't want to talk about all the other talents because then the video would end up being really long, and you literally don't ever swap these talents. The only talent you ever swap out is for AoE. You go from Ravager to Dreadnought, boom. And then of course these like preferential ones that aren't going to really affect a rotation, such as this row and this row, that doesn't really matter. But as far as the other talents, you use these talents pretty much all the time. I didn't deviate from these talents at all, and I killed 9 out of 10 mythic bosses as arms, and I killed some Legion generals as Fury, and I used these talents for every single boss. There's not really any reason to talk about the other talent options and how you perform your rotation with those. If there's anything that changes, I will just make another video updating, you know, how the rotation is with new talent setup or whatever. But as it stands right now, you use these talents all the time. Without further ado, let's get into it. So I've spent a good amount of time thinking about what the most optimal way to teach somebody the rotation is. Honestly, I don't really know what the best way is, so I'm just going to try my best. If you have any recommendations or there's things that you'd like me to do in future videos, please leave it down in the comments. But for now, I'm just going to go over some clips of each of the different engagement types, being like single target without condemn, cleave, and then AoE. The reason I think that going over clips is the easier way to teach this is because you can see how the rotation actually performs in practice, and I can go over the priorities, you know, show you guys exactly what you want to be doing, why you're doing things, and explain it in real time, rather than just going over a priority list. Most guides, as I'm sure you guys are well aware, most guides are like this, where it is just a flat priority list. While I think that these can be helpful, especially for people that don't really like to watch videos, in my opinion, I don't think this gives you the full story. And when I try to learn a new spec, reading these priority lists, again, while it is helpful and while they do have some value, sometimes it doesn't really give you the whole story and teach you actually how to play the class in practice. And a lot of times people follow these guides and then they are so strict on themselves trying to follow the priority list to a T that they end up doing things completely backwards. A lot of the time the priority list isn't actually indicative of how you play the class, especially because it's not going to account for certain talents, certain, you know, timings and all this other stuff. It's more nuanced than just a flat do this, do this, do this. Usually that's not how it actually ends up playing out. So that's why, in my opinion, it is a little bit better to go over clips because it is more of a real world scenario and you can see how things actually end up being performed. Before I get into the clip, let's talk about Signet real quick. So Signet, as you can see, activating Ravager, Recklessness, or Avatar randomly casts one of the other two abilities at reduced effectiveness. Of course, we don't have Recklessness as a button on arms, but we can still generate Recklessness via Ravager or Avatar. One thing to note about this is that if you're using one of these abilities, it cannot proc itself. So for example, if I Avatar, it cannot give me an Avatar proc, so it is guaranteed to either give me a Ravager or a Recklessness. So basically it is a coin flip every time. The favorable outcome in almost all scenarios is that you want your Avatar and your Ravager to both give you Recklessness. The reason for this is that Recklessness is just insane value for arms. Not only does it overlap, giving you additional crit chance, which is just flat out pretty much extra damage, especially during your Colossus Smash. It's doubling your rage gen, and when you're in Condemn window, that is just so much value. You can just get out, like, especially if you're like during Lust or you have like additional haste for whatever reason, you can end up getting like a full 10 more condemns out during your Colossus Smash, and it's just okay. Maybe not 10. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but you can get it. You can get way more condemns out, and there's a higher chance of them critting, and that is just way more value than your Avatar proccing a Ravager or your Ravager proccing extended duration on a Avatar. So unfortunately, as a result of this, arms is a little bit RNG. If on single target on your opener you don't get a Recklessness proc, you're kind of SOL and your damage is going to deviate a massive amount. You'll see pretty much every single top log is just a result of them getting favorable outcomes with their Signet procs. So that's something worth noting. How you play doesn't really change based on what proc you get, but of course we'll go into that. But I would recommend having a way to track Recklessness, or to at least track what you proc. But as you can see right there, I procced Avatar and it procced Ravager. That's not really favorable. I would rather it just give me Recklessness. And then you can see I throw down Ravager and it procced an Avatar. Again, not favorable. I personally have a little weak aura here that shows up if I get Recklessness. You'll see it in the clip. I recommend getting something like that. But ultimately, I just wanted to go over this real quick because this is a massive portion of your damage, and this is going to affect your damage a lot based on what proc you get. Again, you have no agency in this, so it's not a huge deal, but it's not a huge deal knowing what is the best, but it can help in explaining why sometimes your damage seems a little bit lower than usual. So first off, let's talk about the single target burst. Here's just looking at some hot fixes. Okay, so gotta get the Deviate Delight on. Can't be making a video without that. Gotta look cool. Okay, so first off, what you want to do here, pop my unused trinket, and then I charge in. First global, you want to be Avatar plus Warbreaker. Basically, you want to get your DPS cooldowns on cooldown as soon as possible. If you don't already know, Avatar is not on the global cooldown, so you can press it at the exact same time as Ravager. You literally want to just charge in and do these immediately, especially because on burst, or on open rather, the boss, you're able to condemn the boss, but the boss is not going to be in condemn range for a bit. Again, I'll talk about the rotation outside of condemn, but for now we're just going to go over what your like opener would be. So you charge in, instantly Avatar Warbreaker. This is just to get these on cooldown. By the way, every time that you use Avatar, you want to be pairing it with Warbreaker Ravager. These are your main cooldowns, and you're not going to get a whole lot of value if you don't pair these with each other, because of course Warbreaker increases the damage that the target takes by 30%, and then Ravager gives you additional rage gen, but you're mainly using Ravager just for the fact that it's going to proc Signet and can give you Recklessness, which is massive value. So here I'm going to Avatar into a Warbreaker because they're off global, so I can press them both simultaneously. And then, as you can see, my Avatar procced a Ravager, so that's a little bit unfortunate, but my Ravager procced a Recklessness. One thing to note, if your Avatar procs a Recklessness, your auto attack swing that you're going to get right here is going to overcap you on rage. So then you want to press like 1 or 2 condemns based on your current haste and stuff like that. just so that you don't overcap and then you throw your Ravager a little bit delayed. But that's only if you get a Recklessness proc. This is very min-maxy thing, so if you're just getting into it, you can just start off by always doing the exact same static rotation where you charge in Avatar Warbreaker and then throw down the Ravager just so you get the muscle memory down. But that is a little optimization that you can make. So here, my Ravager procced a Recklessness, which is pretty good. My auto attack is going to go off, which is going to overcap me, but that's okay because I press condemn at the exact same time. And here, you literally just smash condemn. It's a meme. I'm sure we all know that warrior just smashes condemn during cooldowns, or that your whole spec is condemn, and that's basically true. Generally, what you want to do is during your Colossus Smash window and during your avatar, you want to get off as many condemns as humanly possible, and that's basically your whole burst. Outside of your burst, once your Colossus Smash cools down, then you pretty much just start using your rage spenders, or your rage generator, such as Skull Splitter. You never want to use Skull Splitter during your Colossus Smash because you want to just be getting as many condemns off as possible, and usually with Lust or with a Recklessness proc or whatever, you're able to generate enough rage, especially with Ravager extra rage gen. You're able to generate enough rage to just smash condemn over and over and over again during Colossus Smash. The main thing is just that you want to get as many condemns out as humanly possible during Colossus Smash. If you get low on rage and you have an additional global, you can use a Skull Splitter during your window if you literally have 0 rage and you couldn't otherwise press something else. But again, generally you just want to be pressing condemn as much as possible. Then once we get outside of Colossus Smash window, we still have some uptime on Avatar, so again, we just want to press condemn as much as possible, but we get a little bit low on rage here, so I'm going to throw down a Skull Splitter, and then again, just go into, smashing into condemn. And now, we're getting to a point to where we have really low rage, and things are going to start to slow down. So what we're going to do is, in between every condemn, we're going to overpower. The reason for this is just that you simply don't have enough rage to just spam condemn over and over again, but every time you spend rage, you have a chance of resetting the overpower proc. And basically the way that you want to see overpower is that it's like free damage, because otherwise you would just be sitting there auto attacking. So you're gonna pretty much, what the rotation looks like is just that you're sitting there waiting to condemn, and then if your condemn procs an overpower reset, you press overpower, and then you condemn again once you have enough rage. Oh, sorry, fell asleep there. So then another thing that you want to track is your deep wounds. This is, by the way, only during condemn. I'll talk about, again, what your rotation looks like not in condemn. Basically, you only ever press Mortal Strike when your deep wounds is about to fall off. You generally want to press Mortal Strike while deep wounds is still active, so that your Mortal Strike benefits from the mastery bonus, so that your Mortal Strike doesn't do like 0 damage. Otherwise, you don't really press that. So here you can see that my deep wounds is getting to 3 seconds, so then I'm going to Mortal Strike to reset it. And then again, I'm just going to sit here and just spam condemn. One thing that's worth noting is that it's good to track the Ashen Juggernaut stacks. You don't want to let these stacks fall off if you're in condemn range, because if those stacks fall off, you lose a lot of additional damage via your condemn, and that's bad. As you can see here, my Skull Splitter came off cooldown, and I was able to press it, generate me some rage so I can condemn a little bit more. And yeah, that's basically your single target when you're able to condemn, is literally just condemn as much as possible. Mortal Strike to apply deep wounds again, and then overpower and Skull Splitter in between. And then once your Warbreaker and Ravager comes up again, you would just press those on cooldown, and then you would just smash condemn again during Colossus Match as much as possible. Generally, it's good to pool rage. So as I could see, the clip kind of cuts off here, but let's just assume that it keeps going. My Warbreaker and Ravager are going to be up in 4 seconds, so a good thing that I could do here is, instead of spending my condemns, I could wait a couple seconds, pool some rage, so that when I pop my Warbreaker and my Ravager, I can get out a couple additional condemns because I saved up my rage. One thing that you want to note though when saving up your rage is you want to make sure to not accidentally drop your condemn stacks, because again, like I said earlier, that'll affect your damage a good bit. But yeah, that's pretty much all you do, is just filter in condemns, Skull Splitter on cooldown, yada yada yada. So basically the same thing here. We're just going to treat this as if it's like, Shriek Wing, you can't condemn anymore. So we're just going to charge in, unuse Trinket, the exact same thing. We're going to Avatar, Warbreaker, Ravager, got double Recklessness proc, pretty cool. So now what you want to do, when you're no longer able to condemn, basically your goal is to press Mortal Strike as much as humanly possible, and then filter in the other abilities. So Now that we press Mortal Strike, and we're assuming that we can't press Condemn right now, the only other thing that is worth pressing during Colossus Smash is Slam. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to actually slam the Slam key, and then Mortal Strike is up, I'm going to Mortal Strike, and then I'm just going to continue slamming. The reason that we don't overpower during your Colossus Smash window is because pressing overpower is just going to it's going to net you less damage than just smashing Slam during your Colossus Smash. So yeah, it doesn't Colossus Smash or using your CDs rather when you can't Condemn really doesn't feel good because Slam does very little damage and Mortal Strike doesn't do nearly as much damage as it has done in previous expansions, so it doesn't really feel that good, but that's what you got. So we're just going to be smashing Slam here. Now that we're out of we're no longer in our Colossus Smash window, the only difference here is that we're just going to be pressing overpower on cooldown pretty much. The main thing to take away though, when you're in single target and you cannot Condemn, is to just Mortal Strike on cooldown and fill her in with your other abilities. So if you need to spend some rage, you spend some rage via Slam. You overpower when you're able to. You Mortal Strike again on CD. Here I use the Skull Splitter to generate some extra rage. Generally speaking, you want to use that on cooldown. And then here I'm going to overpower. You want to make sure not to overcap on rage. So as you can see here, I got to 95 rage. If I went to 100, I would have rather used a spender prior instead of my overpower here. So like right here, if I was at 80 rage and I knew that I was going to overcap, it would have been potentially better to spend a slam rather than using the overpower there. But I use the overpower because I know I'm not going to overcap, and that it's possible that when I spend the rage via my slam or my Mortal Strike, that it resets the overpower. The only really min-maxy stuff with arms and single target is just trying to fit in globals properly in between overpower, or in between Mortal Strikes rather, and trying to have as many resets as overpower as humanly possible. However, the difference between performing this perfectly and very suboptimally is very low, because these abilities just do very little damage, and again, most of your damage is a result of Condemn spamming. So here I'm just spamming Slam, Mortal Strike's off cooldown, press Mortal Strike, overpower, can overpower, and then you basically just filter in the same things. And again, you just use Avatar, Warbreaker, Ravager on CD. That's pretty much it. Now let's take a look at Cleave. So Cleave is pretty much the same thing. Again, I'm going to be assuming that you can Condemn here, but basically Cleave is exactly what you do in single target. The only difference is that you sweeping strikes. So if you're on a boss like Huntsman and you're able to, there's already 2 targets there, you want to start with the sweeping strikes because that's a global, and you'd rather use the global earlier than later, and you want to get it on cooldown. So you're going to instantly sweeping strikes, charge in, again, same thing here, Avatar, Warbreaker, and then throw down the Ravager. I got a Recklessness proc here, so I could have spent like a couple Condemns instead of instantly using the Ravager, but that's not really going to make too big of a difference. And then you're just going to do exactly what you do in single target. You're just going to be spamming Condemn as much as possible, yada yada yada, and it's the exact same thing as single target. Literally, it's kind of boring. The only difference here is that you sweeping strikes on cooldown. The only instance in which you sweeping strikes on cooldown rather than saving it for your next Warbreaker or Ravager is if there are targets constantly there. The only reason you do this is to line up your sweeping strikes with your next Avatar use, because that's when you're going to get the most value out of it. So if you press sweeping strikes on cooldown, it'll end up lining up with your next Avatar. However, you only do this if there's a constant wave of adds that you can always be gaining the benefit from sweeping strikes. However, if after your first sweeping strikes all the adds are dead, and then adds spawn like 10 seconds later or something, then you can hold off and use your sweeping strikes once you have your Warbreaker and Ravager back up. But this really depends on the fight, spawn timings of the adds, a whole lot of stuff like that. But generally speaking, it's better to just get sweeping strikes off cooldown than it is to line it up with your Warbreaker Ravager. The main thing is that you just always want to make sure that your sweeping strikes is going to line up with when you use Avatar. Outside of that, you can just use it on cooldown. You don't need to worry too much about it lining up with Warbreaker Ravager, but this really depends on the circumstance, like I said. So in a fight like Huntsman Altimore, where there's always dogs, you can just sweeping strikes on cooldown, and again, make sure that it lines up with Avatar. Outside of Condemn, it's the exact same thing as the other single target rotation. Again, the only difference is that you're using sweeping strikes. Now let's talk about AoE. So the only difference in AoE is that you're going to be using Dreadnought instead of Ravager, And usually you want to pair this with the conduit. I believe I have Fury conduits in right now, so don't flame me. But you want to pair this with the Crash the Ramparts conduit because it's going to increase your overpower damage, and you would just replace Mortal Combo usually. But I talked about that in my previous video. So in this demonstration, I'm going to be assuming that you are using Dreadnought. The reason that you use Dreadnought is because really your only consistent or reliable way of doing AoE as arms past 2 targets is Bladestorm. Your rotation is literally almost exactly the same as it was against the Cleave training dummies. However, the only difference is that now you have Bladestorm. But it's not exactly the same, but we'll go into it. So what you want to do here is you want to charge in, and you want to Warbreaker right before you Avatar. Again, Avatar is not on global, but in single target, I press them at the exact same time. On AoE, you want to make sure that the Warbreaker goes off prior to pressing Avatar. I got a phone call. Okay, so the reason that you want a Warbreaker first is because your Avatar can proc a Bladestorm like it did right here. And if you use Avatar but you haven't used Warbreaker yet, your Bladestorm can proc, and then you're not gaining the additional damage from your Warbreaker. And that's no bueno, because most of your AoE damage is a result of Bladestorm. So this is another reason why Signet is particularly good, and this is also why you one of the main reasons that you run Dreadnought in AoE is so that you have access to Bladestorm, because Ravager does very little AoE damage. So you're going to run in Warbreaker first global, and then Avatar immediately afterwards. You're going to hope that your Avatar procs a Bladestorm. If it doesn't proc a Bladestorm, you're going to instantly Bladestorm. So you basically would just follow what I would do immediately after this. So immediately after this, I'm going to proc a Bladestorm. You don't want to use Sweeping Strikes immediately because you don't gain any value of your Sweeping Strikes when you are in a Bladestorm. You want to save your Sweeping Strikes for after that. So I'm just going to, go in, Avatar, Warbreaker, Bladestorm, and wait a little bit for the first Bladestorm to run out, and then I'm going to Bladestorm again, wait for the full duration, and now I got full value out of my Warbreaker with double Bladestorm. I did 21k burst, not too bad. And then here you're just going to go into what your rotation would be like in Cleave. So you're going to Sweeping Strikes, and then you're going to spam Condemn. One thing that you want to do though is instead of just like spamming Condemn, you actually want to filler in with more overpowers. The reason for this is because with Dreadnought, your overpower actually does AoE damage, and unless you're overcapping on Condemn, or unless you're overcapping on Rage rather, you want to use it pretty much in between. I don't think I do that perfectly here because it's been a while since I've played Arms AoE. So rather than using Condemn here, since I'm definitely not going to overcap from my auto attack here, I rather would have just used my overpower, because that's going to do AoE damage, and the value from that AoE damage is actually pretty good. So as you can see here, I finally fillered it in. Generally, you want it to look like Condemn, Overpower, Condemn, Overpower, Condemn, Overpower. That's generally what you want to see, because the Overpower is going to do some AoE damage. As you can see, when I use my Overpower here, it actually did a sizable amount of damage, especially during Sweeping Strikes, because you get double of the value from Dreadnought. And then I'm just going to be, spamming Condemn, Overpower pretty much during my Sweeping Strikes window. Outside of Sweeping Strikes, Condemn isn't nearly, or not Condemn, Overpower isn't nearly as valuable, because it's not going to be doubling that line, but it still does AoE damage, and it is really your only source of AoE. As you can see here, my damage is starting to fall off a lot, and outside of Sweeping Strikes, there's very little that you can do. When you're at 5 targets, here's a quick question that a lot of people ask about AoE, is when do I Whirlwind? So Whirlwind, up to 5 it hits only up to 5 targets, and it does 1100 physical damage. The thing about Whirlwind is that it's physical damage, and it costs 30 rage. The thing about Condemn is that Condemn, where is it, dude? Condemn is shadow damage, meaning that it is entirely unmitigated, whereas physical damage always mitigated by armor, which means that it's going to do on average about 30% less damage, whereas shadow damage is entirely unmitigated. So this 4,200 number is actually how much it's going to do, whereas the 1,119 damage from Whirlwind is actually going to be less than that. However, the rage cost on Whirlwind is lower at 30, whereas Condemn is 20 to 40, and the 4,000 number is if you were to use it at 40, but if the person doesn't die, 20% of the rage spent is refunded. Therefore, Condemn's average cost, if you were to use it at 40, it would go down to 32. What you can gain from all this information is that even at 5 targets, generally Whirlwind is not worth using, because you have to pay attention to if there's actually 5 targets. And also, sometimes you're just not going to have as much value hitting everything as you would as just focusing a priority target and just smashing down the priority target with condemn. So the only instance in which you ever press Whirlwind is if you cannot condemn. That is, and there are 5 targets. I guess you could even at 4 targets if you can't condemn. Outside of that, it's usually better to just pool your rage for when you're able to condemn again. So the main takeaway from this is that if you can't condemn, just press condemn, and that Whirlwind is bad. Another thing in AoE is to make sure that you are reapplying deep wounds whenever you're able to, or whenever you need to rather. I've had a few people ask me like, at what point in time, like how many seconds left with the mob living should I reapply deep wounds if I'm still able to condemn? Would it be better to like throw in 3 condemns than it would be to condemn twice and mortal strike once? Generally speaking, there's a lot of like math that goes into this and timing and stuff like that. I would recommend just generally, if your deep wounds is about to fall off, even if the target is very close to dying, like 2 globals from dying, just reapply deep wounds. And overall, I think that's a little bit more consistent than letting deep wounds fall off and just smashing condemn, because sometimes the mobs can live longer than anticipated, yada yada yada, and the difference in damage there isn't even significant to begin with. So generally, it's better to just reapply Mortal Strike. In terms of how you keep playing the rotation, you just Warbreaker on CD, Sweeping Strikes on CD. These are pretty much going to line up with each other with how you played. And you want to just be min-maxing how much you can condemn pretty much. And that's kind of it. The AoE is really weird. The main difference, or the main thing about ARMS AoE is that it doesn't matter if there is 2 targets or 10 targets. You pretty much do the exact same thing outside of pressing Whirlwind a couple times if there's a lot of targets. But even then, you rarely press Whirlwind just because it is less value than pressing Condemn. And it requires, there's a lot of prerequisites of like not being able to press Condemn and there actually being 5 targets for you to press, and it not being better to just single target a guy down. One little general tip, I would recommend having an auto attack swing timer. The reason being is that it sometimes in single target there's a lot of downtime, and generally you're just waiting to have rage to be able to press slam or to press condemn. So something that I would recommend that you see a lot of higher end warriors doing is that you can track your swing timer, and then in between these swings you're basically doing nothing. You being in melee doesn't matter in between these swings. So what you can do is you can have a swing happen and then you can charge out and charge back in, or like intercept, or you can just like walk out and charge back in. And you basically are, the main value that you're getting out of that is that you're just getting additional rage via your charge. So that's a little min-maxy thing. You see a lot of people doing that. So I'll give you a little bit of an example. Let me spend some rage. Let's say I'm in single target here. I can get an auto attack off and then walk out, charge back in, and then I still get the auto attack and I get the additional rage from charge. So that's a little min-maxy thing. I'd recommend having a way to track your auto attack timer, because you can also just track it visually, but it's also going to change based on your haste, and if you're like during lust, it might not be worth it to do that. So that's a little min-maxy thing. If the video helped and you'd like to see more videos, please make sure to drop a like and let me know. If you think that the video sucked and I could have done a better job explaining the rotation, please let me know. I'm very receptive to feedback, and I am working on trying to get this a little bit better. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.